Sputnik. D-Lou.
We're good.
Oh, it's already gone.
Yeah, we're good.
Alrighty then. If that's the case, it's time for more episodage. No crazy music drops this week. The new Venom movie's out. We didn't get to see that yet. But we did decide we wanted to talk about some music because recently you've began experimenting with actually listening to music.
Yeah. And the length of full albums.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Getting to know some artists a little better and all that good stuff. Expanding the musical palette, we might say.
Yeah.
And we've had this debate many a times, kind of talking about the greatest artists from certain eras. And essentially, in my mind, there's a pretty clear-cut example of when just unequivocally the best artists at the time got together and collabed, and that was the track Forever back in 2009 with Eminem, Kanye, Drake, and Lil Wayne. Definitely some great collabs outside of that, but the time that like the four people who were essentially at the top of the hip-hop world got together and made a song and essentially like have had great careers up to then and even beyond then for most of them. But like it's I say that with some hesitation because I feel like every time DJ Khaled drops an album now, it's like, oh wow, that's a crazy collab.
Yeah.
And then it kind of sucks, and then the artists kind of fall off after that, you know, like putting Lil Baby, Da Baby, and 21 Savage on a song in 2020, you're like, oh, this might be kind of cool.
Yeah.
And Roddy Ricch is on there.
Right.
And then you're like, that kind of sucked, and now they're all trash. So what we decided is let's talk about the best artists from every era. 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and so far into the 2020s.
Yeah.
Which artists in the hip-hop specific world are the best of that era, like a Mount Rushmore, top four, you know, whatever you want to call it. We're going to debate those ones, and a rule for this was whatever era you take an artist in, you can't take another one. You can't take them in another era. So definitely an interesting dynamic there, I think.
Yeah. And then you can only choose 4 artists.
Yeah, 4 artists. So I did come up with some honorable mentions because there were some people I wanted to mention, but didn't necessarily make my top 4 for one reason or another.
Yeah.
Do you want me to start with those, or do you want to start with the 90s?
Yeah, no, start us off.
All right. So in starting off talking about the 90s, for me, I have a couple of honorable mentions. From Wu-Tang Clan, I do have Ghostface Killah. Great rapper, great career, great features, great albums. Personal catalog-wise, he isn't my favorite just on his personal catalog. I do like a lot of the Wu-Tang stuff, but I do feel like a lot of his success was from his surrounding circumstances to some degree. I also have Black Thought from The Roots in there. The only reason I have him in there is because that I don't have him a little bit higher in this is because, one, there's some greats from the 90s, but two, also I think he benefits from having The Roots around him, and I think his career has gotten even better since the 90s.
Yeah.
Essentially making his overall catalog a lot better than if you were to just pull what he had in the 90s. I also wanted to throw Mos Def in there. Mos Def had some great work in the 90s, great artist that I love a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's get into my top 4 here. And this is not in like necessarily a particular order, but I'll start off with a couple obvious ones. Tupac.
Yep.
Great artist, great albums in the 90s.
Yep.
Him and my second artist, which is Notorious B.I.G., I feel like are shoo-ins for the 90s because if you cut, like that's what you got from them, right? Like careers cut short, but still great catalogs for even just that brief period of time that they had them.
Yeah.
So I really like both of those artists. Now, I will say, in terms of just personal taste, they aren't my favorites, just because I grew up in a different era, listened to different styles of music. But I have a lot of respect for them. I do like a lot of stuff from both of them. But these next two, I would personally have a little bit of a higher preference for personally. That's Jay-Z. Really like his 90s catalog, from Reasonable Doubt all the way up until you're almost getting into the Blueprint eras, which were, of course, the 2000s. I will say it was close for me to put him in the 2000s because of the Blueprints.
Right.
But essentially what it came down to is just I think he hit his prime by the end of the 90s. And that carried into the 2000s, but I think some of his best stuff is the 90s. Similarly, I also put Nas in this category. Illmatic and a lot of his other early works are really, really good albums. Him and Jay-Z going back and forth in the 90s was pretty cool. So that's my top 4 for the 90s.
Cool. So there are some that I have like honorable mentions, and then other decades just didn't care to. It felt pretty clean and cut. So one of them is Mary J. Blige. I love her style. I thought the vocals and this, granted, when I did some of my research, I just listened to one album. If I haven't heard them like a whole lot, so her being one of them, I listened to her first album. Solid work though. I love the production that she had. She was in her own lane at the time, and like she's just one of the more iconic people when you think 90s hip hop.
Right.
But I still think that there are better. I did want to shout out Snoop just because him as a artist, like he's iconic. It's Snoop Dogg. Just when it comes to music, I'd rather listen to these other 4.
Yeah.
So I do agree. Tupac, Biggie, they're shoo-in. It's
Right.
pretty obvious. But the two that I differ on are Busta Rhymes. One that I still listen to constantly. I think he does good. Kind of not just like then, but kind of carrying his career throughout the years. Granted, he hasn't had a lot of great work in the most recent years. But getting some features, one off the top of my mind, like with M, like still carrying into the 2000s. I really like Busta's style. The other one is Andre 3000. Granted, it's Outcast because really his only work solo is his most recent one.
Yep.
But nonetheless, his lyrical schemes are out of this world. He's widely considered as one of the top artists by your favorite artist. So I felt it was necessary to throw him in there.
Yeah. So both of them over Nas and Jay-Z.
There's reason.
We'll see. Okay.
Yeah.
So that actually is a good segue because I have Andre 3000 as an honorable mention for the 2000s. That's when you get Stankonia from him, which personally to me is definitely top 2 of their albums for me. I also really like Aquemini, which was a couple years earlier, but it was because of that second great album with all the hits on there and even what he's done beyond that I included him as an honorable mention from the 2000s. With him and a couple of these artists, for me, it was almost like they were stuck between 2 cutoffs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If we were to make like a 95 to 2005, he'd probably be in that one for me, you know?
Right.
But it's because it's like if we're differentiating his 90s catalog and his 2000s, he's got half and half, but then you got, Tupac or Biggie with 2-3 classics in that era. So anyways, I also threw Jeezy in here. Young Jeezy at the time. He goes by Jeezy now. Great features, whether that's 808s with Kanye, whether it's his personal catalog from that era with Put On, The Recession, all that kind of cool stuff that he was doing. Really different from what I feel like the main mold of the time was, but still brought a really cool flavor, music I still really like, and I still come back to from him. And then another kind of pioneer for the time, but really just towards the end of that era. And realistically, he has a lot of these artists ahead of him to thank for his success. But Kid Cudi did have a great run towards the end of the 2000s. Definitely pioneered some of these artists that we'll get into later for me for the 2010s and 2020s. But for my top four here, we've got Eminem, Lil Wayne, Kanye West, and for me, the fourth spot went to 50 Cent. Again, like pretty similar to that Forever track that we're talking about. Eminem definitely had a couple highs and lows in that time period. We talked about that in our episode. But overall, really, really solid catalog. 3 of my personal favorite albums during that time. Likewise, Lil Wayne, great works in that time. The Carter series and all of that doing really well. Also with him, I will say towards the end of that era, we do get a couple of dips in his catalog, but overall exceptional. And then Kanye West, of course, you got the College Dropout trilogy through 808s and Heartbreak, which are really good. And then 50 Cent had a couple classics during that time as well. And I'll digress from there because then we're gonna get into discussions of who I put elsewhere. So.
Yeah. So 50 Cent's one of my honorable mentions, because I have the same Wayne, M, and Ye for 2000s. But the fourth spot that I gave it to was Jay-Z. And
I can't argue with that. The Blueprint, there's lots of great stuff.
So that's mainly why. Am I going to come onto this podcast and say that I've listened to a full Jay-Z album? No, I'm not going to lie to the fans. It is what it is. But do I know that the Blueprints are another, like, one of those albums where it's like, it's that album?
Yeah.
Yes, I know that.
Yeah.
So more just like a hats off to you. I haven't really listened to you, but I'm not going to say you're not one of the best in that decade. So I gave it to Jay-Z, and then we'll move
into the 2000s or 2010s here.
Yeah.
So with these first two that we did, the 90s, I will say for me, even though there's some legends up there, it's really hard for me to distinguish my top 4 because artists like Black Thought, Ghostface Killah, Mos Def, even Andre 3000, exceptional artists, and so it's like hard for me to distinguish my top 4 personally up there because it's like there's some great ones.
Right.
In the 2000s, there's great artists for sure, but it's pretty clear to me like who I feel like are the top dogs in that time. The 2010s, we get back to more of a problem that was similar to the 90s, where there's a couple clear ones for me, but then there's also some guys that are really close up there personally. I did throw Future in here as an honorable mention. He changed the way hip-hop sounds. So much of what you get today, even from artists like Juice WRLD or like a Playboi Carti, you get so much of that influence from Future in these guys that we're talking about now as some of like the most popular artists.
Yeah.
But there's better artists. Also, Chance the Rapper, between Acid Rap and Coloring Book in that era, I think were both classics, but there are better artists overall. Similarly, A$AP Rocky has a couple great albums from that era, and Pusha T, Daytona is one of the classic albums, as well as a couple of his other ones from the 2010s. But pretty clearly to me, number one here is Kendrick Lamar. You've got at least 2, if not 3, of the best hip-hop albums, maybe ever, but for sure of the 2010s, both from him. J. Cole has a great stretch as well in there. J. Cole is also pretty close for me in the 2020s, but ultimately it's the fact that you get KOD, you get the Revenge of the Dreamers series with Dreamville, you get 2014, you get For My Eyes Only. There's so much in there of his personal catalog that for me, the off-season and the features, not that they don't live up to it, but there's just so much in the 2010s that's great from him. I also, this is where I put Drake. Some people might include him in the 2000s, but I think all of Drake's best catalog work you get in the 2010s. You get Take Care, Nothing Was the Same. Scorpion, if that's your cup of tea, not for me.
Right.
If you're reading this, it's too late, though. All of his best works to me are in there. And maybe controversial, maybe not. I have Travis Scott here in the 4 spot with Days Before Rodeo. While, Birds in the Trap isn't necessarily his best project, you still get tracks like Goosebumps, iconic stuff like that, Pick Up the Phone.
Yep.
And then, of course, you get Astroworld towards the end, which is, one of those albums that kind of, to me, defines that decade's hip-hop evolution.
Yeah.
And those are my top 4 for the 2010s.
Solid work. So this one will... It's hard because I feel like, for the most part, we are pretty similar. So, I got Drake because, like you said, that's where his best work is, at least I think so. Obviously, you agree with that. From 2010 till this period, undeniably greater. Anybody that disagrees, you're an idiot. Then you got Kendrick, where all of his catalog, minus Mr. Morale, is 2010s. Yep. So to not include him is blasphemy. And then I agree with Cole. Granted, the Off Season is one of my favorite albums from him. But just the body of work within the 2010s, there's just so much more you can choose from. And he still pops off. It's not like he's worse, just new J. Cole's better, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you.
Yeah. So, my last person, I put Post in here because of his versatility.
Sure.
That's mainly it. You have a lot of greatness from him. I don't know where all of his albums year-wise fall in.
So his first 3 are all 2010s. 2016 to 2019, you get Stoney, Beer Bongs, Bentleys, and Hollywood's Bleeding.
Yeah, and so I've told you this, Beer Bongs, Bentley, my favorite Post Malone album, followed by Hollywood's Bleeding. Like I said, mostly it's versatility. Mm-hmm. And I just think he's one of those people where you throw him on a song, it's not going to get worse. It's assault. Anyways, so I chose Post for my last spot.
Yeah, no, and it's hard for me to argue with that because of how much I personally like his music as well. I would say the only thing that keeps me from putting him in that kind of conversation is when you come to pure hip hop and rap styles. I think there's people that do that genre specific sound better than him.
100%.
But I will agree, I don't know if there's many people that do versatility across genres and across styles as well as him. And he definitely has that hip hop aspect to a lot of the music. So, I can't really complain too much about that. 2020s, I feel like we're going to get some at least some differences here.
I agree.
Because it is early on, we're not even halfway through. And this one for me is hard because, again, not like a clear-cut 4 stand out to me, but for different reasons than the rest. It's a different era. There's different music gets streamed differently. Artists get famous differently.
Yep.
And not that any of that is inherently better or worse than it was before. It just changes the landscape. And so there's different, every year there's new and different styles emerging, styles getting popular. But to jump into a couple of honorable mentions, for me here, I did throw Nas in here as an honorable mention. The 6-album run between the King's Disease series and the Magic series with Hit Boy, incredible.
Yeah.
It was so close to putting him in this top 4 for me instead of the 90s. But ultimately, with how good Illmatic was and how good he was when he came on the scene, to hold your own against Jay-Z as a teenager is insane.
100%.
So anyways, he's in the honorable mentions for me. I also have Don Toliver as an honorable mention with Life of a Don, Heaven or Hell, and Lovesick, and Heartstone Psycho. They're not perfect albums, but it's a very good run compared to other artists in the 2020s that have had very streaky runs. Very unique sound, but again, kind of going back to the Post Malone argument, I think there's people that do better rap and hip-hop aspects than him. I think his versatility is what's cool.
Yeah.
To get into my top 4, you know, I can already feel like comment fingers just getting angry online because, you know, you're not going to get a Playboi Carti in this list for me.
No.
Influential for sure, and I did consider him at a couple places just because of how influential he's been. But with my first pick here, I do have Vince Staples. Self-titled, Ramona Park, and Dark Times from this year.
Yeah.
3 nearly flawless albums in a row from him in the 2020s. Just absolutely absurd. Very, very, very underrated rapper over his career, and even lately, I love that he's finally getting a little bit of a larger show of respect in at least in the critical community, not necessarily popular community. Second here, JPEG Mafia. I've got you know, I Lay Down My Life for You this year, Scaring the Hoes last year, LP earlier in the 2020s decade. Just he's defined and he's broken so many boundaries and pushed boundaries of the music in this era, all while doing things that the pioneers, I think, would respect from him. Mm-hmm. Being a great lyricist still, being an innovative producer, and not sacrificing his vision for other people's commercial successes or whatever. So I really like that about him and his music. Again, probably a little bit of an underrated guy, at least to the common fan right now.
Yeah.
Third, only really one album from them in the 2020s, but is JID. Great career so far. He's proven to me that he is one of those guys that's going to continue on the legacy of earlier artists, even when that's not necessarily the popular thing right now. And then fourth, again, not really a personal favorite of mine right here, but just a guy who I have respect for what they're doing for music. Tyler, the Creator.
Wow.
Pretty solid last project. Again, I will say again, not my personal cup of tea. I do prefer other artists over Tyler, Creator, but I love what he's done in hip hop and how he's grown personally as an artist in this decade.
Yeah. So there's not one that we have the same. So that's a good thing. Oh, well, I guess we'll find out. So I will say that because I don't like Tyler in the slightest. That is not my music. Yeah. But I do agree that's for an honorable mention. Sure. Also, I didn't bring him up before, but Chance the Rapper, I'm going to throw an honorable just because.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyways, just had to do that. So this is where I put Nas. Because,
and I can't complain about that.
Because, not to say and not to discredit his 90s.
Yeah.
Not even in the slightest.
No.
But because there's no clear-cut greatest, if you don't count, the ones that we've already said before.
Yeah.
It's real slim pickings. I really think that anybody can take the crown. I don't think there's I'm the best. No, I think there's 4 or 5 people that are neck and neck could kind of take that spot or the comer-ups, Yeah. So it was easy for me to put Nas here.
Yeah.
With that 6-album run. Next. So I have Cordae. Granted, his best album was 2019.
Yeah.
I still really enjoy From a Bird's Eye View. He has an album coming out that I just found out the other day. Mm-hmm. Just found out. But it's also his features. I think he's a great lyricist, and I think we're only getting little snippets here and there, but I think, and I'm hoping with this next album, we really get a full-fledged, I'm here. Kind of like with JID, because I think JID's the guy that's who else wants to get up here with me? Because right now it's just me.
Yeah.
Which also segues. I do have JID. We do have
Okay,
one.
so we got
one similar. But with Corday, for me, it's more so. I can see him throughout this decade be that top guy too.
Okay.
I think right now it's a little early, but I still think he produces some great tracks
Yeah.
and has some great features. So then I have JID. What is that album called? The Forever Story?
Forever Story.
Solid album.
Super good.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback off of what you said. Great dude. I love his schemes, and I get little flashes of manipulation as Eminem did early on. I like the way that he manipulates because it's not the same as M, but he's still very good at it in his own lane.
Yeah.
Now, the last person I put is Travis
Okay.
because of how much I enjoyed Utopia and how great I thought that album was, made me go back and enjoy other
Earlier stuff. Yeah.
So without Utopia, I'm not a fan of Travis, and I
Okay.
don't really care for what he's doing at all.
Yeah.
The only thing I can ever respect is production.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to say he's the greatest lyricist or anything like that, but
No.
but what he does but what he does for the game is great. So that's the reasoning behind putting him in the 20s.
Yeah.
Honorable mentions, I guess Jack Harlow.
Not even that.
But only because I think it's because his greatest album is in the 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the Travis discussion, you brought up he's not the greatest lyricist, you
Right.
know. And to me, what I feel a lot of with Travis's music is definitely some shades of old Kanye West. Not necessarily old Kanye West, but maybe like 2010s to 2015s Kanye West.
Yeah.
Right before Travis comes on the scene, because Kanye at that time was just doing crazy musical things with hip hop and not necessarily being the greatest rapper. Now you get great bars from him every once in a while,
Right.
for sure. And I do think occasionally Travis will come up with something that like is pretty witty to me, or I'm like, I would never expect that from a Travis song, but like, cool, I'm glad I got it, you know? But yeah, I think just his ability to put music together has been exceptional. I do think Utopia was great. But yeah, like I said, there's not really a whole lot for me to complain about, I guess, until you brought up Jack Harlow.
I only wanted a reaction from you, and I didn't even get that.
He might be in my worst four rappers of the 2020s, just for those last two albums.
Oh, that's funny.
No, I enjoy some of the Harlow music, but it's
Yeah.
yeah.
He's,
Anyways,
yeah.
what I will leave this episode off saying is I'm very hopeful that the 2020s develop into something a little better musically.
Yeah.
Not to say there hasn't been good music, because there has, and there's been music I love. But I feel like just, again, with the way the industry's adjusted and changed and how artists have to succeed now, I think it disincentivizes being a great artist in the classical hip hop context.
Yeah.
And that's to me why guys like Vince Staples and JPEG Mafia and even JID to an extent, who are on my list, don't have the same kind of ring to their name that these earlier guys that we've talked about did.
Yeah.
Tyler on my list is probably who I would say the most well-known, famous, popular hip-hop artist is. And Tyler's fame comes from the early 2010s.
Yeah.
And I think the longevity of his ability still comes from that. Yeah. Not that he's a much better artist now than he used to be.
Right.
But I don't think if he were to start off with a Call Me If You Get Lost, it gets the same reaction as it would if he didn't have all these albums before or all this fame before. But anyways, definitely some solid music. I would love to hear some great stuff in the future
Me too.
to round this decade out. But
Dude, where did all the classics go? Because like that's what I feel like is missing from like this decade so far,
Right.
and like even like because I won't say the 2010s because you have stuff like To Pimp a Butterfly and
yeah,
Good Kid, Mad City, and 2014 Forest Drive, and
Yeah.
if you're reading this, it's too late.
right.
But like that's what I mean as like nobody's taking that like top spot. Like the closest
Yeah.
I would say is JID, but
Yeah, I think the Forever Story probably is the closest thing.
Right.
But I will say it's early.
right,
It does take a few years for you to come back and be like, this is right up there with some of those greats.
yeah,
So, we're maybe not all the way through there. I will also say, just on a totally separate note, I think in the changes of the music industry, and maybe it's my taste, but I don't necessarily think it is only that. I think what's happening in the country music scene the 2020s decade is essentially what's happened to hip hop in the 2000s and 2010s, just with the resurgence, the changes in style, the fame of the artists.
yeah,
I would very much argue that in terms of people who have become recently famous, the biggest music stars outside of quote unquote pop, because pop is just popular,
right,
if we're talking subgenres, I think, or genre specifics, I guess, I would argue that most of the biggest music stars that have come out of the 2020s are country people.
yeah. I 100% agree,
Um,
and I think it's because part of it is everybody wants to be a rapper now. Like,
yeah,
it's yeah,
yeah, it's true.
yeah,
But yeah, there are some great albums,
Right.
and I will say, with us doing an episode like this where we're not talking a specific album because nothing's dropped this last week or two. There are some exciting albums still to come out. You talked about Corday. Tyler, the Creator, drops this week, tomorrow
does he?
actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Who else did I just see? Freddie Gibbs is rumored to drop a Halloween album. The Weeknd's leading up to some kind of release. So there's definitely a lot of cool stuff still to happen and still to come out, which we'll go into and look at and talk about. So
Fingers crossed.
yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah,
But yeah, until next time,
yeah.
listen to old music.
Please.